The early morning sun filtered through the massive windows of Harrington Estate, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Elena Rodriguez stood at the imposing iron gates, her worn backpack clutched tightly to her chest. She took a deep breath and pressed the intercom button. Yes? The voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and impatient. I'm Elena Rodriguez. I'm here for the housekeeping position, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The gate swung open with a mechanical hum, and Elena walked up the long driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and colorful flower beds. The mansion loomed ahead, a palace of stone and glass that seemed to touch the clouds. Elena had never imagined she would be applying for a job as a maid. Not after 6 years at the National Music Conservatory. Not after all those nights practicing until her fingers ached and her neighbors banged on the walls. But life had other plans. 3 months ago, her mother had collapsed at work. The diagnosis was grim, an aggressive form of cancer that required immediate and expensive treatment. Elena's dreams of joining an orchestra vanished overnight, replaced by the harsh reality of mounting medical bills and dwindling savings. The mansion's front door opened before she could knock. A tall, thin man with graying hair and impeccable posture stood in the doorway. Ms. Rodriguez, I presume. I am Howard, the head of household staff. You're 7 minutes early. Mr. Harrington appreciates punctuality but not eagerness. In the future, arrive precisely on time. He stepped aside to let her in, his expression giving nothing away. Elena nodded, already feeling out of place in her simple blue dress and worn flats. The entrance hall was larger than her entire apartment, with a crystal chandelier that sparkled like a frozen waterfall and artwork that belonged in museums rather than a private home. Mr. Harrington is a very private person with exacting standards, Howard continued, leading her through corridors lined with antiques and paintings. The staff quarters are in the East Wing. You'll have your own room. Meals are provided but eaten separately from the family. Working hours are 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. with 2 30-minute breaks. Sundays off unless there's an event. Elena did the math in her head. That was over 13 hours a day, 6 days a week. But the salary was triple what she could make anywhere else, and the live-in position meant no rent to pay. Every penny saved went straight to her mother's treatment. Mr. Harrington will want to approve you himself, Howard said, stopping before a set of double doors. He knocked twice and opened them without waiting for a response. The study was a masculine space of dark wood and leather, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a large desk positioned to overlook the sprawling grounds. Behind the desk sat Victor Harrington, his attention fixed on the laptop screen in front of him. At 45, Victor Harrington had the sharp features and cold eyes of a man who had built an empire by never accepting anything less than perfection. His tailored suit probably cost more than Elena's entire education, and the watch on his wrist could have paid for her mother's treatment several times over. Sir, the new maid, Howard announced. Victor Harrington looked up, his steel-gray eyes scanning Elena with the detached interest of someone assessing a piece of furniture. Education? He asked without preamble. Elena swallowed. I have a bachelor's degree in music performance from the National Conservatory. A flash of something, surprise, maybe even amusement, crossed his face. A musician cleaning toilets. How the economy fails the arts. He turned to Howard. References? Excellent, sir. Professor Chen speaks very highly of her character and work ethic. Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward her old music teacher, who had pulled strings to get her this interview when she'd learned of Elena's situation. Any experience in household service? Victor asked. No, sir, Elena admitted. But I'm a fast learner and I'm not afraid of hard work. Victor's lips thinned into what might have been a smile on someone else. Everyone says that until they've been scrubbing marble for 8 hours. He glanced at a document on his desk. Your mother is ill. That's your reason for seeking employment here? Elena hadn't expected him to know that personal detail. Yes, sir. She needs specialized treatment. I don't tolerate personal dramas affecting work performance. No phone calls during working hours. No leaving early for emergencies. No emotional breakdowns in the hallways. Is that clear? Elena felt a flicker of anger but pushed it down. Perfectly clear, sir. Very well. Howard will show you the rest of the house and explain your duties. You start tomorrow. He returned his attention to his laptop, dismissing them without another word. Howard let her out, and Elena released the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Don't take it personally, Howard said once they were in the hallway. Mr. Harrington treats everyone that way. He demands excellence and offers generous compensation in return. Do your job well and you'll never have a problem with him. Over the next 2 hours, Howard gave her a tour of the sprawling mansion, 26 rooms in all, including 7 bedrooms, a formal dining room, a library, a home theater, and a state-of-the-art kitchen where a French chef named Philippe reigned supreme. You'll be responsible for the guest rooms, the main corridors, and the informal living areas, Howard explained. Lily handles Mr. Harrington's personal quarters, and Thomas takes care of the grounds. The formal rooms are cleaned by Mrs. Wu, who has been with the family for 30 years. Elena nodded, trying to memorize the layout and the endless list of rules. No noise after 9 p.m. No personal items visible during working hours. No entering certain rooms without explicit permission. As they passed through a wide corridor lined with tall windows, Elena stopped abruptly. Through an open doorway, she caught a glimpse of something that made her heart skip a beat. A magnificent grand piano, its polished black surface gleaming in the afternoon light. Without thinking, she stepped into the room, drawn to the instrument like a moth to flame. "This is the music room," Howard said, following her inside. "Mr. Harrington rarely uses it these days. It's cleaned once a week by Mrs. Wu. You won't have any duties here." Elena stood transfixed before the Steinway concert grand. It was the kind of piano most musicians only dreamed of touching. Worth more than she would earn in several years. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her fingers itching to touch the keys, to feel the weight and resistance she knew would be perfectly calibrated. "It was Mrs. Harrington's," Howard said, his voice softening slightly. "She was quite accomplished, I'm told. After she passed, Mr. Harrington kept it maintained but forbidden to play. The tuner comes quarterly." "What a waste," Elena said before she could stop herself. Howard's eyebrows rose. "A word of advice, Ms. Rodriguez. Never let Mr. Harrington hear you say that. The piano is not to be touched by anyone. He once fired a maid for dusting the keys." Elena nodded, pulling her gaze away from the piano. But as they left the room, she couldn't help looking back, feeling as if she was abandoning an old friend. By late afternoon, the tour was complete, and Elena was shown to her room in the staff wing. It was small but comfortable, with a single bed, a desk, a private bathroom, and a window overlooking the rose garden. "Dinner for staff is at 6 p.m., Howard told her. "Kitchen uniform will be provided. Your regular uniforms are in the wardrobe, 3 sets. They must be kept immaculate. Any questions?" Elena had 1,000 questions, but she shook her head. "No, thank you. I'll be ready for dinner." After Howard left, Elena sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed. She pulled out her phone and called the hospital. "Hi, I'm calling about Teresa Rodriguez. I'm her daughter." "Yes, I'll hold." She waited, heart pounding, until the nurse came back on the line. "How is she today? Did the doctor stop by?" "She's sleeping now?" "That's good. Yes, I'll visit tomorrow evening. Thank you." Ending the call, Elena opened her backpack and took out the one personal item she had brought, a framed photo of her mother and herself at Elena's graduation recital. Her mother was beaming with pride, her arm around Elena, who held a bouquet of roses after performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. "I'm doing this for you." "Mama," she whispered, placing the photo on the bedside table. At dinner, Elena met the rest of the staff. Lily, a quiet woman in her 50s who had worked for the Harringtons for over a decade. Thomas, the groundskeeper, a weathered man with kind eyes and rough hands. Philippe, the temperamental chef who seemed perpetually annoyed. And Mrs. Wu, the senior housekeeper who sized Elena up with a critical eye. "You'll need to build calluses," Mrs. Wu told her over soup. "Soft hands don't last here." Elena looked down at her long, slender fingers. A pianist's hands, her teacher had always said. Hands that had once coaxed beautiful music from ivory keys would now be scrubbing floors and polishing silver. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Elena stretched her fingers in the darkness, silently playing the Chopin nocturne she had performed at her last recital. She could hear every note in her head, feel every dynamic shift and crescendo. Tomorrow, she would begin her new life as a maid in the house of Victor Harrington. She would work harder than she ever had before. She would endure his cold stares and demanding standards. She would save every penny for her mother's treatment. But in her heart, she knew she would always be a pianist, and someday, somehow, she would play again. Elena's first 2 weeks at Harrington Estate passed in a blur of aching muscles and endless chores. Each morning she rose before dawn, put on her crisp uniform and began her duties while the house was still quiet. By the end of each day her body screamed with exhaustion, but she forced herself to stay awake long enough to call the hospital and check on her mother. "You're getting faster," Mrs. Wu commented one morning as Elena polished the banister of the grand staircase. "Still missing spots, though." She pointed to a barely visible smudge that Elena had overlooked. Elena nodded gratefully for the correction. Mrs. Wu was strict, but fair, and Elena had quickly learned that the older woman's approval was hard-earned and valuable. "Mr. Harrington is very particular about the main entrance," Mrs. Wu continued. "He says it sets the tone for the entire house." "Does he ever say thank you?" Elena asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Wu's expression remained neutral, but her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Mr. Harrington doesn't believe in praising people for doing what they're paid to do, but he notices everything. Trust me." Elena had barely seen Victor Harrington since her first day. He left early each morning for his office downtown and often returned late. On the rare occasions their paths crossed, he acknowledged her with nothing more than a curt nod. "He's always been that way," Lily told Elena one evening as they folded laundry together. Even before Mrs. Harrington passed, some people just weren't built for warmth. Elena thought there had to be more to the story, but she didn't press. Everyone in the household seemed to walk on eggshells around the subject of the late Mrs. Harrington. On her days off, Elena visited her mother at the hospital. Teresa Rodriguez was getting weaker with each treatment, but her spirit remained strong. "You look tired, my sunshine," her mother said, touching Elena's cheek with a frail hand. "This job is too hard on you." Elena forced a smile. "It's good money, Mama, and I'm getting used to it." "You should be playing your music, not cleaning some rich man's house." "I still play," Elena lied, not wanting to worry her mother. "There's a piano in the staff room." In reality, there was no staff room, let alone a piano. The only piano in the house was the forbidden Steinway in the music room, which Elena had not dared to approach since that first day. Each time she passed the music room, she slowed her steps, sometimes catching a glimpse of the magnificent instrument sitting in silence. Once, unable to resist, she had stepped inside when she was sure the house was empty and simply stood beside it. Not touching, just being near it. One day, she had whispered to the silent keys. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday in her third week at the estate. Elena was dusting the library when she overheard Victor Harrington on the phone in his study, the door slightly ajar. "What do you mean he canceled?" Victor's voice was cold with anger. "The dinner is in 3 days. I don't care about his hand injury. Find a replacement." "No, I will not cancel the piano entertainment. The Japanese investors specifically mentioned their love of classical music." There was a pause, and Elena found herself holding her breath, duster suspended in midair. "Just fix it, Richard. That's what I pay you for." The sound of approaching footsteps sent Elena hurrying back to her dusting. Seconds later, Victor Harrington stormed out of his study, his face dark with frustration. He barely glanced at Elena as he passed, but she felt the chill of his mood like a physical thing. Later that afternoon, while cleaning the rarely used guest rooms in preparation for the upcoming dinner party, Elena overheard Howard and Mrs. Wu talking in the hallway. "Mr. Harrington is in a state," Howard said, his normally composed voice tinged with worry. "The pianist for the dinner party injured his hand and the agency can't find a suitable replacement on such short notice." "Can't he just hire a violinist instead?" Mrs. Wu asked. "The Japanese guests specifically requested piano music. Mr. Harrington promised them a special cultural experience. You know how he is about his business dealings, everything must be perfect." Their voices faded as they moved down the hallway, but Elena stood frozen, her mind racing. She knew she should forget what she'd heard. Getting involved in Mr. Harrington's business problems would only lead to trouble. And yet, that evening, as Elena delivered fresh towels to the kitchen for Philippe, she found herself face to face with Lily, who was just finishing her shift. "You play piano, don't you?" Lily asked suddenly. Elena nearly dropped the towels. "How did you know that?" "Howard mentioned you studied at the conservatory. I put 2 and 2 together." Lily tilted her head. "You know about Mr. Harrington's pianist problem, don't you?" "I might have overheard something," Elena admitted. You should tell him you can play. Elena shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. He'd probably fire me on the spot for presuming. Lily shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe he'd be grateful for the solution. The choice is yours. She patted Elena's arm and left, leaving Elena with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. For 2 days, Elena debated with herself. She needed this job desperately. Her mother's treatments were working, but there were months to go and the medical bills kept mounting. Could she risk it all on the slim chance that Victor Harrington would appreciate her stepping forward, rather than see it as an overreach? The morning of the dinner party arrived with no resolution to the pianist problem. The entire household was in a state of controlled chaos. Extra staff had been brought in to help with the preparations. The florist arrived with elaborate arrangements for every room. The menu had been planned to the last garnish, and Victor Harrington was in a fouler mood than anyone had ever seen. Everything must be perfect, he snapped at Howard as they passed Elena in the hallway. These investors represent a potential 8-figure deal. If anything at all goes wrong tonight, heads will roll. By late afternoon, the mansion gleamed like a museum. Elena had been assigned to final touch-ups in the main reception rooms, including the music room, where the piano sat spotless but silent. As she carefully arranged fresh flowers on a side table, Victor Harrington entered, followed by Howard. Neither man noticed her presence as they stood before the piano, deep in conversation. We'll have to do without the music, Howard said, his tone carefully neutral. I've informed the catering staff to extend the cocktail hour instead. Victor ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, the first sign of disorder Elena had ever seen in him. It's embarrassing, Howard. I specifically promised Tanaka and his team a cultural experience. They mentioned their love of Western classical music 3 times during our preliminary meetings. Perhaps some recorded music. Recorded? Victor nearly spat the word. Like a shopping mall? This is a multi-million-dollar business dinner, not a backyard barbecue. Elena should have slipped out quietly. She should have remained invisible, as good servants were supposed to do. Instead, she cleared her throat. Both men turned, startled by the reminder of her presence. I apologize for interrupting, sir, she said, her heart pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it. But I couldn't help overhearing. I studied piano at the conservatory. I could play for your dinner party tonight if you'd like. The silence that followed was deafening. Victor stared at her as if she'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. You? He finally said. The maid? Elena forced herself to meet his gaze. Yes, sir. I completed my degree in piano performance before taking this position. Howard looked uncomfortable. Ms. Rodriguez, I don't think... What can you play? Victor interrupted, his eyes narrow with skepticism. Chopin, Liszt, Rachmaninoff, Debussy, most of the classical and romantic repertoire. Elena answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Victor walked slowly around her, as if seeing her for the first time. And why should I believe that a qualified concert pianist is scrubbing my toilets? The crude description stung, but Elena kept her composure. My mother is ill, sir, cancer, the medical bills. This job was the best option available. Something shifted in Victor's expression, not softening exactly, but a flicker of interest. Howard, call Richard.
Tell him we've found our entertainment for tonight. A cold smile spread across his face as he turned back to Elena. Our guests will be...
Surprised, I'm sure, when I introduced my maid as the evening's pianist. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't about solving his problem. This was about creating a spectacle. He expected her to fail, to embarrass herself in front of his important guests. Or worse, he expected her to play adequately enough for his purposes but still be humiliated by being presented as the help, pressed into service for the amusement of the wealthy. I'll need to practice beforehand, she said, fighting to keep the tremor from her voice. And I don't have anything appropriate to wear. You'll wear your uniform, Victor said dismissively. It adds to the unexpected nature of the performance. As for practice, you have, he checked his watch, 3 hours before guests arrive. Make the most of it. Without waiting for a response, he turned and left the room, Howard trailing behind him after giving Elena a look that mingled pity with something like admiration. Alone with the piano at last, Elena approached it slowly, reverently. She sat on the bench, adjusted its height, and placed her hands on the keys without pressing them, feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingertips. This was her chance to play again, to prove herself. But it was also a trap, set by a man who saw her as nothing more than a servant to be used for his entertainment, and quite possibly his amusement when she failed. Elena took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 filled the room, tentative at first, then growing in confidence. By the time she reached the main theme, she had forgotten Victor Harrington, forgotten the mansion, forgotten everything except the music flowing from her fingers. She would not fail. She could not fail, not just for her own pride, but for her mother, who had sacrificed so much for her education. For all the hours of practice, all the competitions, all the dreams that had been put on, hold but never abandoned, the dinner party guests would indeed be surprised tonight, but not in the way Victor Harrington expected. The Harrington mansion, buzzed with activity as staff, made final preparations for the dinner party. Caterers moved efficiently through the kitchen, the scent of expensive cuisine filling the air. Florists added last touches to elaborate arrangements. Waitstaff in black and white rehearsed their choreographed service under Howard's watchful eye. And in the music room, Elena played. For 3 hours, her fingers danced across the keys of the magnificent Steinway, reawakening muscle memories that had lain dormant during her weeks of scrubbing and polishing. The piano responded to her touch like a living thing, its rich tones filling the room with sounds that made her heart ache with joy and longing. She had selected her program carefully, Debussy's Clair de Lune to start, gentle and inviting. Then Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, followed by his more challenging Ballade No. 1. She would finish with Liszt's Un Sospiro, a piece that showcased technical brilliance while remaining accessible to casual listeners. As the clock ticked closer to the arrival of the first guests, Lily appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide as she listened to Elena play. Mr. Harrington wants you to change into a fresh uniform and be ready in the front hall in 15 minutes, she said, when Elena paused. The guests will be arriving soon. Elena nodded, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after hours of intense practice. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the piano lid with reverence. You play beautifully, Lily said softly. I had no idea. Thank you. Elena stood, smoothing her wrinkled uniform. I'm not sure what Mr. Harrington expects tonight, but he expects you to fail, Lily interrupted, her voice matter of fact. He thinks it will be amusing for his guests to watch the maid fumble through a piano performance. The blunt assessment stung, but Elena couldn't deny its likely truth. Then I'll just have to surprise him. 15 minutes later, dressed in a fresh uniform with her hair neatly pinned back, Elena stood in the grand entrance hall alongside the other staff. Victor Harrington paced nearby, immaculate in a tailored tuxedo, occasionally checking his watch or barking last-minute instructions to Howard. He barely glanced at Elena, as if she were just another piece of furniture until needed. That suited her fine. The less attention he paid her now, the greater his surprise would be later. The guests began to arrive at 7 o'clock sharp. First came the American business partners, followed by several local dignitaries. At 7:30, the honored guests arrived, Mr. Tanaka and his team of Japanese investors, 5 men in impeccable suits who bowed formally as Victor welcomed them with practiced charm. Mr. Tanaka, I'm delighted you could join us this evening, Victor said, shaking the older man's hand. I've arranged a special cultural experience I believe you'll enjoy. Mr. Tanaka smiled politely. We look forward to American hospitality. Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Harrington. Cocktails were served in the main drawing room where guests mingled amid the soft lighting and tasteful opulence. Elena stood against the wall with the other household staff, ready to assist if needed, though professional waiters handled most of the service. She noticed Mr. Tanaka admiring the artwork, pausing particularly long before a painting of a traditional Japanese garden. His expression was one of pleasant surprise at finding such a piece in an American home. At 8 o'clock, Howard discreetly signaled for dinner. The guests moved to the dining room, where a long table gleamed with crystal, silver, and fine china beneath an enormous chandelier. Place cards guided everyone to their designated seats, with Victor at the head and Mr. Tanaka in the position of honor to his right. The first course was served, a delicate seafood appetizer that drew appreciative murmurs from around the table. Wine flowed freely, and conversation hummed pleasantly as Victor expertly guided discussion toward business opportunities while maintaining the pretense of a social gathering. By the second course, Elena could feel the anticipation building in her chest. Soon Victor would make his move. Soon, she would either triumph or be humiliated before this gathering of powerful people. Midway through the main course, an expertly prepared Wagyu beef that had Mr. Tanaka nodding in approval, Victor tapped his crystal glass lightly with his spoon. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. "Distinguished guests," he began, his voice smooth as polished marble. "I mentioned a special cultural experience this evening. As you enjoy your dessert, we'll have some music." Mr. Tanaka smiled appreciatively. "Ah, wonderful. I am great admirer of Western classical music." Victor's lips curled in what might have been a smile or a smirk. "I'm pleased to hear it. And tonight's performance will be unique." He turned slightly, his gaze finding Elena among the staff lined against the wall. "Elena, please step forward." Heart-pounding, Elena moved into the circle of attention. She could feel the curious stares of the guests, the barely concealed surprise that someone in a maid's uniform was being addressed directly. "Ms. Rodriguez works for me as a member of the household staff," Victor announced, his tone making it clear how far down the social ladder that placed her. "But I recently discovered she has another skill. Tonight she will play the piano for us." There was a moment of uncomfortable silence. Elena saw confusion in the guest's eyes, uncertainty about how to react to this unusual turn. Was this meant to be amusing? Were they supposed to laugh at the idea of a servant performing? Mr. Tanaka, however, simply nodded politely. "I look forward to hearing you play, Ms. Rodriguez." Victor's smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the older man's graciousness. "Indeed, I think we'll all be enlightened by the experience." He gestured toward the music room. "Shall we?" The guests rose from the table, dessert momentarily forgotten, and followed Victor through the hall to the music room. The staff hurried ahead to open doors and ensure everything was ready. Elena walked among them, her mind now strangely calm despite the hammering of her heart. This was it. This was her moment, not just to play again, but to reclaim something of herself that had been buried under weeks of servitude and worry. The music room had been transformed for the evening. The furniture had been rearranged to create a small concert space, with chairs positioned around the grand piano. Soft lighting cast a warm glow over the instrument, making its polished surface gleam like black water. As the guests took their seats, Elena approached the piano. She could feel Victor's eyes on her, cold and expectant, already savoring what he assumed would be her embarrassment. She sat at the bench, adjusted it slightly, and took a deep breath. The room was utterly silent now, all eyes upon her. In her maid's uniform, she knew she made an incongruous figure at the magnificent instrument. Let them stare, she thought. Let them wonder. Without introduction, she placed her hands on the keys and began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune. The first notes floated into the room like moonlight on water, delicate and ethereal. Elena closed her eyes, letting the familiar melody flow through her fingers. She had played this piece 100 times before, for recitals, for auditions, for her mother on quiet evenings in their small apartment. Now she played it for herself, and for these strangers who expected so little from her. As the piece built to its gentle climax, Elena opened her eyes briefly and caught a glimpse of Victor's face. The smug expectation was gone, replaced by an expression of shock that might have been comical under different circumstances. She transitioned smoothly to Chopin's Nocturne, her confidence growing with each measure. The room had changed. She could feel it in the quality of the silence. No longer was there the awkward anticipation of watching someone fail. Now there was genuine attention, appreciation. Mr. Tanaka's eyes were closed, his head nodding slightly with the rhythm. One of the American businessmen had leaned forward in his chair, wine glass forgotten in his hand. A woman near the back had tears glistening in her eyes. And Victor stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. Elena's fingers found the opening notes of the ballade, and she surrendered completely to the music. This piece was a journey from contemplative melancholy to passionate intensity, and she poured every emotion of the past months into her playing. Her mother's illness, her abandoned dreams, the daily humiliations of her new position, and now, this moment of reclaiming her true self. Her hands flew across the keyboard in the technically demanding passages, never faltering, never hesitating. Years of practice had built this proficiency, and no amount of scrubbing floors could erase it from her muscle memory. As the final chords of the ballad resounded through the room, there was a moment of absolute silence, that magical pause after a truly moving performance when an audience needs to catch its collective breath. Then Mr. Tanaka began to applaud, rising to his feet. The others followed suit, the applause growing until it filled the room with thunderous appreciation. Several guests were smiling in wonder and delight. The American businesswoman dabbed at her eyes with a cocktail napkin. Only Victor remained still, his hands at his sides, his face unreadable. Elena stood and bowed formally, as she had been taught at the conservatory. Her heart was soaring, her cheeks flushed with the joy of playing again after so long. "Magnificent," Mr. Tanaka said, approaching the piano. "Truly magnificent, Ms. Rodriguez. You play with great feeling." "Thank you, sir," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the emotions churning within her. "Where did you study?" Another guest asked. "The National Conservatory," Elena answered. "Why are you working as—" The guest stopped, suddenly aware of the awkwardness of the question. Mr. Tanaka glanced at Victor, who still had not moved or spoken. "Mr. Harrington, you are full of surprises. To have such talent in your household." Victor seemed to snap back to himself, his businessman's smile returning, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yes, quite unexpected. Ms. Rodriguez is multi-talented." The guests crowded around Elena, asking questions about her training, her favorite composers, her technique. In her simple uniform amid these elegantly dressed people, she should have felt out of place. Instead, she felt more herself than she had in months. This was her world: music, appreciation, the connection between performer and audience. For a brief shining moment, she was not the maid but the musician, respected for her art rather than her ability to polish silver. And somewhere in the back of the room, Victor Harrington watched, his world tilted slightly on its axis by the revelation that the woman who cleaned his home could create such beauty, such emotion. His plan to humiliate had backfired completely, leaving him the only one who felt small in a room full of appreciation for talent he had tried to diminish. Mr. Tanaka approached him, smiling broadly. "Mr. Harrington, I think we have much to discuss about our business arrangement. Anyone who recognizes such talent in unexpected places, that is someone I wish to work with." Victor nodded mechanically, his eyes still on Elena as she described her interpretation of Chopin to an enraptured audience. "Yes," he said finally, "talent can be found in the most unexpected places." But even as the words left his mouth, he wondered if he had ever truly recognized talent, or if he had spent his life blinded by wealth and position to the true worth of those around him. The morning after the dinner party, Elena woke to a gentle knock on her door. She had slept deeply for the first time in weeks, her dreams filled with music and applause rather than worry and exhaustion. "Come in," she called, quickly sitting up and smoothing her hair. Lily entered with a small tray. "Good morning. Howard asked me to bring you this." She set down the tray, which held a cup of steaming coffee, a warm croissant, and a folded note. Elena blinked in surprise. Staff never received breakfast in their rooms. They ate together in the kitchen before beginning their duties. "What's this about?" she asked, reaching for the note. Lily shrugged, but her eyes sparkled with something like excitement. "Howard didn't say, but everyone's talking about your performance last night. Mrs. Wu said she's worked in grand houses for 30 years and never heard playing like that." Heat rose to Elena's cheeks. "It wasn't that special. I'm just happy I didn't embarrass myself." "Not special?" Lily laughed softly. "Mr. Tanaka asked for your contact information before he left. Said he has friends on the board of the symphony orchestra." Elena's heart jumped. "He didn't, he did." And Mr. Harrington looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. With a conspiratorial smile, Lily left Elena to her breakfast and the mysterious note. With trembling fingers, Elena unfolded the paper. It contained a brief message in Howard's precise handwriting. "Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Harrington requests your presence in his study at 10 a.m. Your morning duties have been reassigned. Howard." Elena's stomach tightened. Was she being fired? Had her moment in the spotlight angered Victor so much that he was dismissing her? She had humiliated him after all. Not intentionally, but the outcome was the same. His plan to shame her had backfired spectacularly. She ate little of the breakfast, her appetite lost to anxiety. By 9:30, she was dressed in her uniform and making her way to Victor's study, her mind racing with possible outcomes and what she would do if she lost this job. Her mother's treatments were far from complete, and the hospital bills continued to mount. Howard was waiting outside the study door. "Good morning, Ms. Rodriguez." His tone was formal as always, but there was a new hint of respect in the way he addressed her. "Mr. Harrington is on a call. He'll be with you shortly." Elena nodded, clasping her hands tightly to keep them from shaking. "Howard, am I being fired?" The older man's expression softened slightly. "I wouldn't presume to speak for Mr. Harrington, but you've worked for him for years. You must have some idea what he's thinking." Howard hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I have never seen Mr. Harrington as affected by anything as he was by your performance last night. Whatever happens in there," he nodded toward the study door, "I believe it will be significant." Before Elena could ask what he meant, the study door opened. Victor Harrington stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed as always, though there were shadows under his eyes suggesting a restless night. "Ms. Rodriguez, come in." His voice gave nothing away. Elena followed him into the study, her heart pounding. The room felt different in the morning light, less intimidating somehow, though still a space that spoke of power and privilege. Victor moved behind his desk but remained standing. "I imagine you're wondering why I've called you here." "Yes, sir." Elena stood with her back straight, determined to face whatever came with dignity. "Last night was unexpected." Victor's gaze was direct but unreadable. "You play extremely well." "Thank you, sir." Elena waited, certain there was more coming. Victor picked up a pen from his desk, turning it between his fingers, a surprising gesture of uncertainty from a man who always seemed so decisive. "Mr. Tanaka called me this morning. He was quite impressed with you. He was very kind. He's rarely impressed by anything." Victor set the pen down with precision. "He mentioned that his cousin sits on the board of the symphony orchestra. He's arranged an audition for you next week should you be interested." Elena's breath caught. An audition. A real audition with the symphony. The opportunity she had dreamed of before her mother's illness had derailed everything. I don't know what to say. Say yes or no. It's a simple question." Victor's tone had an edge to it now. "Yes," Elena said quickly. "Yes, of course I'm interested, but—" She hesitated. "My position here, my mother's medical bills, that brings me to my proposition." Victor sat down, gesturing for Elena to take the chair opposite his desk. Another first. She had never been invited to sit in his presence before. "I'm prepared to offer you a new arrangement." Elena sat cautiously on the edge of the chair. "What kind of arrangement?" "You'll continue to live here, but in one of the guest rooms in the main wing rather than the staff quarters. Your primary duty will be to practice and prepare for your audition. In return, you'll play for my business associates when requested and provide brief performances at dinner parties." Elena stared at him, trying to process this unexpected turn. "And my current duties will be reassigned." Victor's expression remained neutral. "Your salary will remain the same with additional compensation for performances." It sounded too good to be true. "Why would you do this?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. For a moment, Victor looked almost uncomfortable. "Mr. Tanaka signed the investment deal this morning. 8 figures, as I mentioned. He explicitly stated that your performance influenced his decision. He believes a man who recognizes talent has vision, and vision is valuable in business." So that was it. She was still being used, just in a different way. Now she was a business asset rather than a servant, but still a tool for Victor Harrington's success. The realization stung, but the opportunity was too important to reject out of pride. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Harrington. I accept." "Good." Victor nodded briskly. "You'll move your things today. Howard will show you to your new room. The piano is at your disposal for practice, though I'd appreciate advance notice so it doesn't interfere with household schedules." He turned to some papers on his desk, a clear dismissal. Elena stood to leave but paused at the door. "Mr. Harrington?" He looked up, one eyebrow raised. "Last night when you introduced me as the maid, you expected me to fail, didn't you?" A flicker of something, perhaps discomfort, perhaps shame, crossed his face. I expected a performance consistent with your position. You wanted to humiliate me. Victor held her gaze for a long moment. Perhaps I did, he finally admitted. And instead I humiliated myself. It was as close to an apology as she was likely to get. Elena nodded once and left, closing the door softly behind her. Howard was waiting to escort her to her new room, a beautiful space 3 times the size of her staff quarters, with a view of the gardens and a small sitting area with a bookshelf. Your personal items will be brought up shortly, Howard told her. Is there anything else you require? Elena looked around the elegant room, still processing the dramatic change in her circumstances. No, thank you. This is more than enough. After Howard left, Elena sat on the edge of the plush bed trying to make sense of everything that had happened. An audition with the symphony, a new position in the household, a complete reversal of her status overnight. Her phone buzzed with a message from the hospital, a reminder of her mother's appointment that afternoon. Reality crashed back. No matter how much her situation at the mansion had changed, her mother was still ill, the treatments were still expensive, and nothing was certain. Elena changed into her regular clothes, jeans and a simple blouse she kept for her days off, and made her way downstairs. As she passed the music room, she heard sounds from inside. Curious, she paused in the doorway. Victor Harrington sat at the piano staring at the keys with an expression of frustrated longing. He placed his hands on the keyboard and played a simple scale, his technique stiff and unpracticed but not completely unskilled. Then he attempted the opening bars of a simple Bach prelude, making several mistakes before stopping abruptly. He hadn't noticed her presence, and Elena started to back away quietly, but the floorboard creaked beneath her foot. Victor's head snapped up, his expression immediately hardening when he saw her. I apologize for interrupting, Elena said. I was just on my way out to visit my mother. Victor stood quickly, closing the piano lid with a sharp snap.
It's nothing.
Just checking the tuning. But there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability she had never seen before, that made Elena pause rather than retreat. You play? She asked gently. Badly, a long time ago. His tone discouraged further questions. Under normal circumstances, Elena would have left immediately, but something had shifted between them since last night. The previous hierarchy had been disrupted, leaving an uncertain new dynamic in its place. The Bach prelude you were attempting? It's a beautiful piece, she said. One of the first classical works many pianists learn. Victor's jaw tightened. As I said, it was a long time ago. I have meetings to attend. He moved to leave, but Elena stayed in the doorway. Mr. Harrington, she said, gathering her courage, I could help you with it. Your hand position is causing the difficulty with those transitions. He stopped, his expression a complex mixture of offense and interest. I don't need piano lessons from... He caught himself, but Elena heard the unspoken word, from the maid. From a conservatory graduate who played for the Japanese investors you were so eager to impress? She finished for him, surprising herself with her boldness. I understand. Excuse me. She stepped aside to let him pass, but Victor remained where he was, studying her with narrowed eyes. After a long moment, he spoke again, his voice quieter. My mother insisted I learn piano as a child. My father thought it was a waste of time for a boy who would grow up to run a business empire. Something dark flickered across his face. He made his opinion very clear when I was 13, after a recital where I struggled with a difficult piece. Elena waited, sensing there was more to the story, but Victor shook his head slightly as if to clear away the memory. I haven't played since. Not really. He looked at the piano, then back at Elena. Your mother's appointment, what time? 2 o'clock, Elena replied, caught off guard by the question. The car will take you. It's at your disposal now for hospital visits. Victor straightened his already perfect tie. When you return, perhaps you could demonstrate the correct hand position for that Bach piece, purely out of curiosity. It wasn't quite a request for lessons, but it was something close to it. Elena nodded, hiding her surprise. I'd be happy to. Victor walked past her without another word, his usual brisk, purposeful stride carrying him down the hallway. But there had been something in that brief exchange, a glimpse behind the cold, controlling facade he presented to the world. As Elena left for the hospital, She found herself wondering about the boy who had been shamed for his musical struggles, and what kind of man he might have become if his passion hadn't been crushed beneath the weight of his father's expectations. 3 months passed, bringing changes to Harrington Estate that no one could have predicted. The grand mansion, once silent except for the efficient movements of staff, now regularly filled with music. Elena practiced daily, preparing for her upcoming performance with the symphony orchestra. Her audition had been a resounding success, earning her a guest soloist position for their winter concert series. But it wasn't just Elena who played. 3 evenings a week, the unusual sight of Victor Harrington sitting at the piano became a reality, his stiff posture gradually relaxing as Elena guided him back to the instrument he had abandoned in childhood. "Your hands are naturally suited for this," Elena observed during one of their sessions. "You have the reach for the difficult chords." Victor frowned at the sheet music before him, a Beethoven sonata far beyond his current abilities, but one he had insisted on attempting. "Reach doesn't matter if the technique isn't there. Technique comes with practice," Elena replied patiently. "You're expecting too much too quickly. I expect excellence in all things. Excellence takes time, even for millionaires." That earned her a sharp look, but also, surprisingly, the ghost of a smile. These moments of almost warmth had become more frequent as the weeks passed, though Victor still maintained a careful distance in most of their interactions. Their arrangement had settled into an unexpected rhythm. Elena lived in the guest room, practiced her music, and occasionally performed for Victor's business associates. In turn, Victor provided for her mother's ongoing treatments and had arranged for a home care nurse for when Teresa was eventually released from the hospital. Today was special, though. After months of treatments, doctors had finally declared Teresa Rodriguez ready to go home. Elena had spent the morning preparing the small apartment she had maintained all this time, making sure everything was comfortable for her mother's return. As Elena gathered her things to leave for the hospital, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Victor standing in the hallway, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Mr. Harrington," she said, surprised. They usually met only for their scheduled piano sessions or when Victor required her to play for guests. "I understand your mother is coming home today," he said without preamble. "Yes, the car is taking me to pick her up in an hour," Victor nodded. "I've taken the liberty of making some arrangements. If they're not to your liking, you can certainly refuse." Elena waited, curious and slightly wary. "The guest cottage on the estate has been vacant since my groundskeeper retired last year. It's small but comfortable, with a garden view and no stairs to navigate. I thought perhaps your mother might recover better there than in a third-floor apartment downtown." Elena stared at him, speechless. The guest cottage was a charming stone building at the edge of the property. She had glimpsed it during walks in the garden. It was the sort of place featured in quaint countryside paintings. "That's extremely generous," she finally managed. Victor waved a hand dismissively. "It's practical. You're here most days anyway, and this way you can be closer to your mother during her recovery." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing a business transaction rather than a life-changing act of kindness. "Thank you," Elena said simply, knowing from these months of working closely with him that Victor was uncomfortable with expressions of gratitude or emotion. He nodded once. "The cottage has been prepared. The nurse knows the location. Howard will give you the keys." As he turned to leave, Elena called after him. "Mr. Harrington?" He paused, glancing back. "Would you like to meet my mother? When she's settled in, of course." Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or uncertainty. "I'm sure she'll be tired from the hospital stay." "Another day, then. She's been asking about you." Victor's eyebrows rose. "About me?" Elena smiled. "I've mentioned our piano sessions. She taught music before she got sick. That's how I first learned to play. She'd love to hear how you're progressing." For a moment, Victor seemed genuinely at a loss for words. "Perhaps," he finally said before continuing down the hallway. The cottage exceeded Elena's expectations. Sunlight streamed through windows overlooking a private section of the garden. The furniture was elegant but comfortable, the kitchen small but well-equipped. Most surprising of all, an upright piano sat in the corner of the living room, not as grand as the Steinway in the mansion, but a quality instrument nonetheless. When Teresa Rodriguez arrived that afternoon, She wept at the sight of her new temporary home. "It's like something from a story," she said, touching the piano keys gently. "And you say your employer arranged all this?" Elena nodded, helping her mother settle into a comfortable chair. Teresa was thin from her long illness, but color had returned to her cheeks, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about her prognosis. "Mr. Harrington has been unexpectedly helpful." Teresa studied her daughter's face. "The same man who wanted to humiliate you at his dinner party? The one who made you wear your uniform to play for his guests?" Elena smiled wryly. "The very same. People can surprise you, I guess." Teresa's expression was knowing. "And these piano lessons you're giving him?" "He needed help with his technique. It's a fair exchange for everything he's done." "If you say so, my sunshine." The next week brought final preparations for Elena's symphony debut. She practiced for hours each day, refining her interpretation of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the same piece she had played at her graduation recital, now to be performed with a full orchestra. Victor continued his own practice, though their regular sessions were temporarily suspended while Elena focused on her concert preparation. She occasionally heard him playing in the music room when she visited the main house. Simple pieces, still, but played with growing confidence. The night before her performance, Elena found a package outside her cottage door, a long flat box with no card or note. Inside was an elegant black dress clearly custom-made and precisely her size. She recognized it immediately as concert attire, the kind of dress professional soloists wore, simple but beautifully crafted from the finest materials. The next morning, as Elena prepared nervously for the biggest performance of her career, there was a knock at the cottage door. She opened it to find Victor standing on the doorstep looking formal in a dark suit. "The car is ready whenever you are," he said. "I thought you might appreciate a ride to the concert hall." "You're coming to the performance?" Elena asked, surprised. Victor had never mentioned any intention of attending. "Of course." He seemed almost offended by the question. "My business associates have taken an entire box. Mr. Tanaka flew in from Tokyo specifically." Elena felt a wave of nerves at the thought of such an audience. "No pressure, then." Victor studied her face. "You're concerned about the performance." "A little," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I played with an orchestra." "You've practiced exhaustively. Your technique is flawless." Elena smiled despite her nervousness. "That sounds like something I would say to you." "I'm merely repeating what I've observed." Victor checked his watch. "We should leave in 20 minutes. Will your mother be joining us?" "The nurse is helping her get ready. She wouldn't miss it for the world." Victor nodded. "I've arranged appropriate transportation for her as well, more comfortable than the regular car." As he turned to leave, Elena called after him, "Mr. Harrington, Victor." It was the first time she had used his first name, and it stopped him in his tracks. "Thank you for the dress. It's perfect." He didn't turn around, but his voice was quieter when he replied, "I noticed you looking at similar styles online. It seemed appropriate." The concert hall was packed that evening. Elena peeked through the curtains at the audience, her heart racing when she saw the filled seats. Her gaze traveled to the box section, where she could make out Victor sitting with her mother and several business associates. The conductor approached, breaking her reverie. "Ready, Ms. Rodriguez?" Elena took a deep breath and nodded. She was ready, not just for this performance, but for the new life that had opened before her, so different from what she had imagined just a few months ago. As she walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, she caught her mother's eye first, Teresa beaming with pride, and then, unexpectedly, Victor's. He wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something in his expression, a quiet intensity that conveyed more than any smile could have. The conductor raised his baton. Elena placed her hands on the keys, and then there was only music, filling the hall with the soaring emotions of Rachmaninoff's concerto. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, finding each note with precision and feeling. The orchestra surrounded her, playing with rich harmonies, supporting and enhancing her performance rather than overwhelming it. In that moment, all the struggles of the past year, her mother's illness, the financial hardship, the humiliation of becoming a maid, seemed transformed, becoming not just obstacles she had overcome, but essential parts of the journey that had brought her to this stage. When the final notes faded, There was a moment of perfect silence before the audience erupted in thunderous applause. Elena stood, bowing deeply as flowers were brought to the stage. Looking up at the box seats, she saw her mother wiping away tears of joy. And beside her, Victor Harrington was on his feet, applauding with an intensity that seemed to channel all his usual restraint into open appreciation. The reception after the concert was a whirlwind of congratulations and introductions. Music directors, patrons, critics, all wanted to meet the remarkable new pianist. Mr. Tanaka presented her with an orchid and an invitation to perform in Japan. Through it all, Elena kept looking for Victor, but he had disappeared shortly after the performance. It wasn't until much later, when most guests had departed, that she found him standing alone in a quiet corner of the reception hall. "The critics are calling it a triumph," she said, approaching him with 2 glasses of champagne. She offered one to him. "I thought we should celebrate." Victor accepted the glass but didn't drink. "You played magnificently." "Thank you." Elena sipped her champagne, studying him curiously. "Why did you disappear?" "Everyone wanted to meet you. The man who discovered me washing his floors." A shadow crossed his face. "Is that how you see it? That I discovered you?" "No," Elena said gently. "That's how they see it. How I see it is more complicated." "How do you see it?" Victor's gaze was intense, genuinely wanting to know. Elena considered the question carefully. "I think we both needed something the other had. I needed the opportunity you provided. And you needed—" She hesitated. "What did I need, Elena?" "To remember that value isn't measured by wealth or status. To reconnect with the part of yourself you locked away as a boy." She met his gaze directly. "To hear music in your house again." Victor was silent for a long moment. "My father would have called that sentimental nonsense. And what do you call it?" A smile, a real one, perhaps the first she had ever seen from him, briefly transformed his face. "The truth, I suppose." As they stood together in comfortable silence, Elena realized how far they had both come from that first dinner party. The millionaire who had tried to shame her had become her patron, her student, her friend. The maid who had trembled before him now stood as his equal. "My mother wants you to join us for dinner tomorrow," Elena said. "She's feeling well enough to cook, and she's eager to discuss your progress with Bach." Victor looked momentarily startled by the invitation, then thoughtful. "I would be honored." As they walked together toward the exit, where Teresa waited with the nurse, Victor spoke again, his voice unusually reflective. "When I asked you to play that night, I thought I knew exactly what would happen. I was so certain of my place in the world and yours." He shook his head slightly. "I've never been happier to be proven wrong," Elena smiled. "That's the thing about music, Victor. It doesn't care who you are or where you come from. It only cares what you bring to it, your skill, your emotion, your humanity." "Your humanity," Victor repeated quietly as if testing the word. "Yes, I think perhaps that's what was missing." "Until you played." Together they joined Teresa, who greeted Victor with the warm familiarity of someone who had heard all about him. And as they left the concert hall, the millionaire, the pianist, and her mother, the future stretched before them, filled with possibilities none of them could have imagined on the day Elena first arrived at Harrington Estate, seeking nothing more than a job to pay her mother's medical bills. Life, like music, could take unexpected turns. The trick was learning to play through the difficult passages until you reached the parts that soared.